At exactly 3:18 on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a security alert. Normally, I would have ignored it. The cameras at Harbor Point Marina sent false notifications all the time. A seagull landing on a piling. A fisherman arriving early. Even the wind could fool the motion sensors. But this alert was different. 3 black SUVs had just driven through my front gate. I froze. Nobody had permission to enter the marina that afternoon. Especially not in 3 luxury vehicles. My name is Thomas Walker. I'm 68 years old. I spent 35 years serving in the United States Coast Guard before retiring to run the marina my late wife and I built together. Harbor Point wasn't the biggest marina on the Chesapeake Bay. It wasn't the fanciest either. But every dock, every piling, every weathered board, had a story. My wife, Sarah, used to say, "A marina isn't where boats live. It's where memories anchor." She'd been gone for almost 4 years. Some mornings I still caught myself reaching for the second coffee mug. Grief has a strange way of lingering. I opened the live camera feed. The first SUV stopped beside Dock C. The second parked near the fuel station. The third remained near the office. Then someone stepped out. My son, Daniel. He wasn't supposed to be there. Daniel managed the marina whenever I traveled, but I'd given everyone the week off while I attended a Coast Guard Veterans Conference in Norfolk. So why was he giving strangers a private tour? I turned the volume all the way up. The wind muffled most of the conversation. Then, one sentence came through perfectly. "Construction begins next month." Construction? At my marina? One of the men in the expensive suit pointed toward the western docks. Daniel nodded. Then he gestured across nearly half the property. The suited man smiled. And shook Daniel's hand. My stomach tightened. Nobody, not even my own son, could approve construction there. I still owned every inch. My first instinct was to grab my truck and drive the 2 hours back to the marina. I even picked up my keys. Then I stopped. The Coast Guard had taught me something that saved lives more than once. When something doesn't make sense, don't charge into the storm. Watch it. Study it. Understand it. Emotion solves very little. Evidence solves everything. So instead of calling Daniel, I started recording every camera angle, every handshake, every vehicle, every license plate. The meeting lasted 43 minutes. Before leaving, one of the men handed Daniel a thick blue folder. Daniel slipped it into his truck without opening it. As the SUVs disappeared through the gate, I zoomed in on the side of the lead vehicle. There was a company logo. Apex Coastal Developments. I'd heard the name before. Every small marina owner along the bay had. They didn't buy waterfront businesses. They erased them. Luxury condominiums. Private yacht clubs. $1-million vacation homes. Entire communities disappeared after Apex arrived. I stared at the frozen image on my screen. My own son. Standing beside developers. Shaking hands. While talking about construction. On land that wasn't for sale. Either I was missing something. Or someone had already decided the future of my marina. Without ever asking me. For the next 10 minutes, I replayed the footage over and over again. Every handshake. Every glance. Every movement. The more I watched, the more something felt wrong. Daniel wasn't acting like a man who had just sold a deal. He looked uneasy. Every few seconds he glanced toward the marina office, then toward the docks, as if he expected someone to interrupt the meeting. That wasn't Daniel. My son had always been confident. Too confident, if you asked his mother. Sarah used to laugh and tell him, "Confidence is a wonderful thing. But don't ever let someone borrow yours." He would roll his eyes every time she said it. Now, I wished he'd listened. I opened my laptop. The first thing I searched was Apex Coastal Developments. I already knew their reputation. I wanted facts. Within minutes, articles filled my screen. Old fishing villages replaced by luxury condominiums. Family marinas purchased and demolished. Historic waterfront businesses turned into private resorts. Every project followed the same pattern. Buy the land. Clear the businesses. Build something wealthier. The company's slogan almost made me laugh. Building tomorrow's waterfront. Tomorrow. At the cost of someone else's yesterday. I leaned back in my chair. Then another thought hit me. Daniel had never once mentioned Apex. Not during our weekly calls. Not over Sunday dinners. Not even when we discussed next year's repair budget. Why keep something this big a secret? I opened the Marina's accounting portal. Even after retirement, I still had administrator access. Daniel knew that. The monthly reports looked normal. Fuel sales, slip rentals, winter storage deposits. Nothing unusual. Until I noticed one payment. $5,000. Received 3 weeks earlier. The sender wasn't listed. Only 2 words appeared. Consulting deposit. Consulting? Harbor Point Marina didn't offer consulting. I clicked the transaction. No invoice. No explanation. No supporting documents. That wasn't like Daniel either. He documented everything. I'd spent years teaching him that. A memory suddenly surfaced. 3 months earlier, Daniel had casually asked where I kept the original property deeds. At the time, I thought he was preparing for estate planning. I even complimented him for thinking ahead. Now, that conversation felt completely different. I checked the document vault. The original deeds were still there, untouched. But one folder had been opened remotely. The Marina survey. The detailed map showing every boundary, every dock, every easement, and every shoreline measurement. It had been accessed just 5 days ago. My heartbeat slowed. Not from relief. From instinct. Something much bigger than a simple property sale was unfolding. I had spent decades reading situations before they turned into disasters at sea. That same feeling was settling into my chest now. Someone wasn't just interested in buying Harbor Point. They were planning something. Weeks in advance. And somehow, my own son had become part of it. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel shaking hands with those developers. By sunrise, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to accuse anyone. Not yet. If there was one lesson 35 years in the Coast Guard had burned into me, it was this. The first version of the story is almost never the truth. At 7:30, I called the Marina. Daniel answered on the second ring. "Morning, Dad. How's Norfolk?" "Quiet. Conference ends tomorrow. I figured I'd check in. Everything okay at the Marina?" There was the smallest pause. Barely noticeable. But I noticed. "Everything's fine. Just catching up on paperwork." Paperwork. That wasn't true. I'd already watched 43 minutes of him touring the property with developers. "You sure? I saw a weather report. Thought maybe another dock had been damaged." "No. Nothing like that." His voice stayed calm. Too calm. We talked another minute about fishing season, fuel prices, and one of the charter captains. Then we hung up. Daniel had lied to me. Not a big lie. Just enough to hide something. That worried me more. People who tell huge lies usually panic. People who tell small lies have practiced. I opened my contacts. One name immediately came to mind. Rachel Brooks. Rachel had spent 20 years as an environmental compliance inspector before retiring. She knew every permit, every zoning regulation, and every loophole developers love to exploit. She also happened to keep her sailboat at Harbor Point. "We'd been friends for nearly 15 years. She answered with her usual laugh. "Thomas, you only call this early when something's wrong. I need a favor. And I need complete honesty." 20 minutes later, she called back. Her voice had changed. "Thomas, I checked the county planning database. There isn't a construction permit. There isn't even a pending application." I frowned. Then why would Apex be touring the Marina? Rachel took a slow breath. "Because they're not looking at the Marina. They're looking at the shoreline." I sat upright. "What does that mean?" "It means someone wants access to the water. Your ducks aren't the prize. The land beneath them is." Before I could answer, Rachel added one sentence that sent a chill through me. "And Thomas, if Apex is involved, they're never interested in just one property." I stared at the Marina map on my computer. Harbor Point sat right in the middle of the bay. On one side, an abandoned seafood warehouse. On the other, an aging shipyard that had been struggling for years. Individually, none of the properties were remarkable. Together, they formed nearly a mile of uninterrupted waterfront. Suddenly, the developer's visit made perfect sense. They weren't buying a marina. They were trying to assemble an entire coastline. And somehow, my son had become the key piece of a deal far bigger than either of us had imagined. For the next 2 hours, I couldn't focus on the conference. The speakers talked about maritime safety, coastal rescue, new navigation systems. I heard almost none of it. My thoughts kept drifting back to Harbor Point. By noon, I was driving home. Not to the marina. To my house. There was something I needed to find before anyone realized I was asking questions. Sarah had always insisted on keeping paper copies of everything. Insurance policies, property surveys, old contracts. She never trusted computers completely. "You can't hack a filing cabinet," she'd always say. I smiled despite myself. Then I unlocked the study. The same oak filing cabinet stood in the corner where it had been for nearly 20 years. Inside, every folder was perfectly labeled. Sarah's handwriting. I ran my fingers across the tabs until I found one marked Property Acquisition. The folder was thicker than I remembered. Purchase agreements, boundary surveys, old photographs. Then, a folded map slipped onto the floor. It wasn't one of ours. Across the top, someone had stamped 3 words. Master Development Plan. I frowned. I'd never seen it before. When I unfolded it, my heart nearly stopped. The map showed the entire waterfront, our marina, the abandoned seafood warehouse, the neighboring shipyard, even the small public pier. Every property had been highlighted in red. Across the bottom, someone had written, Phase 1. There were arrows pointing toward luxury apartments, a private yacht harbor, restaurants, retail shops, and something labeled, Harbor Point Residences. My marina didn't exist anymore. Not on that drawing. It had already been erased. I looked closer. In the lower right corner was a date. 8 months ago. 8 months. Someone had been planning this long before those black SUVs arrived. Then something else caught my attention. A handwritten note. Not Sarah's handwriting. Not mine. Just one sentence. Need Walker family approval before closing. Walker family. Not Thomas Walker. Family. That meant someone believed Daniel could approve the deal. Or, someone wanted him to believe he could. I carefully folded the map. Then I noticed something else inside the folder. An old business card. The name printed across it read, Eleanor Pierce, Maritime Property Attorney. A memory came rushing back. Sarah had hired Eleanor nearly 12 years earlier during a complicated shoreline dispute. I hadn't spoken to her since. If anyone knew what Apex was trying to do, it might be Eleanor. I reached for my phone. Before I could dial, another security notification flashed across the screen. Someone had just entered my Marina office. I opened the live camera feed. Daniel wasn't alone this time. The same man in the gray suit was carrying a large roll of blueprints. Then, the office door closed, and Daniel pulled every window blind shut. For the first time in my life, my own Marina had become a place where I wasn't supposed to see what was happening. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't call the sheriff. And I certainly didn't drive straight to the Marina. Whoever was sitting inside my office wanted privacy. The worst thing I could do was let them know I was watching. Instead, I called Eleanor Pierce. The phone rang twice. Then a calm voice answered. Pierce Maritime Law. Eleanor speaking. Eleanor. This is Thomas Walker. There was a brief silence. Then she laughed softly. Thomas. I haven't heard that name in years. How's Sarah? My smile faded. She passed away 4 years ago. Oh. I'm so sorry. We exchanged a few quiet words. Then I got straight to the point. Eleanor. Have you ever dealt with a company called Apex Coastal Developments? The warmth disappeared from her voice. I have. And I hope they're nowhere near your property. They're already walking through it. She didn't speak for several seconds. Finally she asked. Did they contact you directly? No. They're meeting with my son. Another silence. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. Thomas. Don't assume your son is the one running this. I frowned. What do you mean? Apex has a reputation. They rarely approach owners first. They find someone close to the owner. A family member. A business partner. Someone who can be influenced. They make big promises. Management positions. Profit sharing. Luxury homes. They convince people they're joining the winning side. And once the deal is signed, they're usually discarded. I leaned back in my chair. Daniel wasn't greedy. He could be stubborn, impatient, overconfident. But greedy? No. Eleanor continued. How much have they offered him? I don't know. Find out. Because whatever number they're showing him, it's probably imaginary. Before ending the call, she gave me one piece of advice. If you really want the truth, don't follow Apex. Follow the money. That sentence stayed with me. Follow the money. Not the meetings. Not the blueprints. The money. I logged back into the Marina's financial records. This time, I ignored the income. Instead, I searched every outgoing payment from the last year. Most were exactly what I'd expected. Fuel deliveries. Electrical repairs. Dock maintenance. Then, one company appeared again. Harbor Planning Solutions. The name meant nothing to me. But over the last 6 months, Daniel had approved 5 separate payments. Each one just under $10,000. Nearly $50,000. For what? There were no reports. No invoices. No completed projects. Only one attachment. A confidentiality agreement. I clicked it. Access denied. I stared at the screen. In 30 years of owning Harbor Point, I had never once been locked out of my own business records. Someone had changed the permissions, and only 2 people had the authority to do that. Me. And Daniel. I refused to believe Daniel would deliberately lock me out. There had to be another explanation. So instead of trying to bypass the system, I decided to learn more about harbor planning solutions. The company sounded legitimate, professional, ordinary. Sometimes, those are the most dangerous names. I searched the Virginia Business Registry. The company existed. It had been incorporated just 11 months earlier. Its listed office was nothing more than a virtual mailing address in Richmond. No employees, no website, no phone number, only one registered manager. Michael Cross. The name didn't mean anything to me until I searched it. The first photograph made my stomach tighten. It was the same man. The one wearing the gray suit. The man carrying the blueprints into my office. So Harbor Planning Solutions wasn't an independent consultant. It was connected directly to Apex. The consulting payments had never been consulting payments at all. I printed every transaction, every date, every amount, every approval. Then something caught my eye. The approval signatures. Every payment showed Daniel's digital authorization. Except the very first one. That approval had been made using my administrator account. I frowned. That wasn't possible. I had been in Montana on a fishing trip the day that payment was processed. I even checked my calendar. There it was. 5 days completely offline. No laptop. No office. No internet. Someone had used my account. Not guessed the password. Used it. My pulse quickened. There were only 3 people who had ever known my original administrator credentials. Me, Sarah, and Daniel. I sat in silence. Was my own son responsible? Or had someone convinced him that using my account was harmless? Before I could think any further, my phone rang. Rachel Brooks. Thomas, I've got something. Her voice was tense. I spoke with an old colleague at the county office. He remembered seeing Apex representatives 6 months ago. They weren't asking about your Marina. They were asking about one specific document. What document? The Walker Preservation Agreement. I nearly dropped the phone. What did you say? The Walker Preservation Agreement. They requested copies twice. But both requests were denied. A cold chill ran through me. I hadn't heard those words in over 15 years. Sarah and I had signed that agreement shortly after Hurricane Isabel. Back then, everyone thought we were overreacting. Even Daniel. The document had one purpose: to protect Harbor Point, if powerful developers ever came looking for it. Rachel spoke again. Thomas, I don't think Apex knows what's inside that agreement. They've been trying to obtain it. Which means they're moving forward without understanding what they're actually buying. For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. Because if Rachel was right, then Apex wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Sarah had left one of her own. I drove home before sunrise the next morning. For years, I had avoided opening the attic. Not because there was anything valuable up there. Because everything valuable was a memory. Sarah's sewing machine, her gardening gloves, boxes filled with photographs, and one old cedar chest. The chest had belonged to her father. Sarah kept every important document inside it. Birth certificates, insurance papers, letters we'd written each other before we were married. I hadn't opened it since the day of her funeral. The brass lock clicked. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. Perfectly organized. Near the bottom, I found a large cream-colored envelope. Across the front, Sarah had written 3 words. For Thomas. My hands trembled. There was another note beneath it. Open only if Harbor Point is ever threatened. A lump formed in my throat. Even after all these years, she was still protecting me. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter. Thomas, if you're reading this, it means someone finally came for the Marina. Don't be angry with Daniel. He doesn't know everything. I stopped reading. My heart skipped. She had written this more than 15 years ago. How could she possibly know Daniel would be involved? I continued. People who want waterfront property never begin with land. They begin with trust. If they cannot convince you, they will try to convince someone you love. I closed my eyes. Sarah had seen it coming, long before I ever did. Beneath the letter was a thick legal document, 28 pages, the Walker Preservation Agreement. This time, I read every single line. It wasn't just a restriction on selling the Marina. It was far more powerful. If Harbor Point was ever transferred, redeveloped, or merged into another waterfront project, without unanimous approval from 3 independent trustees, the entire property would automatically be donated to the Chesapeake Maritime Heritage Foundation. Not sold. Not inherited. Donated. No developer, no investor, no member of my family could stop it. I leaned back in my chair. Sarah hadn't built a safety net. She had built a trap. Anyone trying to force a sale would lose everything. Then I noticed something I'd completely forgotten. The trustees. Rachel Brooks, Eleanor Pierce, and Captain Harold Bennett. My former commanding officer, a man whose integrity was beyond question. None of them could be pressured. None of them could profit. Which meant, Apex had been chasing the Marina for months, without realizing it was legally impossible to take. For the first time, I wasn't worried about losing Harbor Point. I was worried about something else. If Daniel eventually discovered the truth, would he believe I had been hiding it from him? Or would he realize his mother had been protecting him all along? Before I had time to answer that question, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. His voice was shaking. "Dad? We need to talk. Something's gone terribly wrong." I didn't waste a second. I got into my truck and drove straight to Harbor Point. The entire drive, Daniel's voice echoed in my head. Something's gone terribly wrong. He hadn't sounded angry. He hadn't sounded defensive. He sounded afraid. When I pulled into the Marina, his truck was parked outside the office. He was pacing back and forth on the dock. The moment he saw me, he stopped. "Dad, I'm sorry." That wasn't what I expected. I thought we'd argue. I thought he'd deny everything. Instead, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. I crossed my arms. "Start talking." Daniel nodded slowly. "They approached me 8 months ago. They said they wanted to invest in the Marina. New docks, modern fuel systems, a bigger repair yard. They said you'd finally be able to retire." I stayed silent. They never talked about condominiums. They never mentioned tearing the Marina down. They said Harbor Point would stay exactly as it was, only better. He looked down at the dock. I believed them. I could hear the regret in his voice. Real regret. They asked me to keep everything confidential. They said if rumors spread, other investors would interfere. So I signed a confidentiality agreement. I frowned. The one I can't access? Daniel's eyes widened. You know about that? I know more than you think. He sighed deeply. They asked me to approve planning expenses. They told me they were environmental studies. They said every waterfront project starts that way. And the money? The consulting payments? I thought they were legitimate. I swear, Dad, I never received a single dollar. I watched his face carefully. 35 years of interviewing people had taught me something. Most lies hide in the eyes. Daniel wasn't hiding. He was ashamed. Then he reached into his backpack. He placed a thick folder on my desk. I found this yesterday. They didn't know I kept a copy. Inside were architectural renderings, luxury apartments, private yacht slips, a waterfront shopping district. Harbor Point Marina was gone. In its place stood glass towers overlooking the bay. Daniel pointed to the final page. My stomach tightened. Across the bottom, in bold letters, were the words, "Current Marina manager to be retained for 6 months following acquisition." 6 months. That was it. After helping them, Daniel would be discarded, just like Eleanor had warned. He looked at me. They lied to me. They were never partners. I was just useful. I slowly closed the folder. No. You were manipulated. Daniel shook his head. That's not the worst part. He reached into his jacket and handed me a business card. I looked down. The name printed on it made every muscle in my body tense. Richard Sloan, Chairman, Apex Coastal Developments. On the back, Richard had written one sentence by hand. If your father refuses to cooperate, we'll make sure he has no choice. I looked up at Daniel. For the first time, this wasn't about a business deal anymore. Someone had just threatened my family. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the tide pushing gently against the pilings. I turned Richard Sloan's business card over one more time. His message wasn't just a threat. It was a mistake. People who truly hold power rarely announce it. They don't need to. Men like Richard wanted people to feel afraid. Fear made people predictable. I handed the card back to Daniel. When did he give you this? Yesterday morning. I told him I wanted more time. He smiled, handed me the card, and said I should think carefully before disappointing his investors. I nodded. So he finally showed his real face. Daniel looked at me. What are we going to do? We're going to let him believe he's winning. He frowned. What? If Richard thinks we've discovered everything, he'll destroy every piece of evidence. But if he believes you're still on his side, he'll finish the job for us. Daniel hesitated. You want me to keep meeting them? I want you to listen. Not promise. Not sign. Just listen. For the first time since I arrived, I saw a spark of determination return to his eyes. Okay. I'll do it. Before we could plan any further, a white pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Out stepped Pete Lawson. Pete had repaired boats at Harbor Point for almost 25 years. He walked toward us, holding a large envelope. Thomas, I've been looking for you. What is it? Pete handed me the envelope. It was left under my shop door last night. It has your name on it. There was no return address. Only 3 typed words. Thomas Walker, Private. I opened it carefully. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. They showed Richard Sloan meeting with county officials, meeting with bankers, meeting with investors. Some had dates written on the back. The oldest photograph was taken almost 2 years ago. 2 years. That meant Apex hadn't recently discovered Harbor Point. They had been planning this for a very long time. At the bottom of the envelope was a flash drive and a handwritten note. They lied to all of us. This is only the beginning. Daniel looked at me. Who sent it? I slowly shook my head. I don't know. But whoever it was, they're inside Apex. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket. Something told me the answers we'd been searching for weren't inside the Marina. They were waiting inside that tiny piece of plastic. I waited until that evening before opening the flash drive. Not because I was afraid of what I'd find. Because once I knew the truth, there would be no going back. Daniel sat across from me in the office. Neither of us spoke. I inserted the drive into my laptop. Only 3 folders appeared. Contracts, emails, financial projections. I opened the email folder first. There were hundreds of messages. Most were ordinary business conversations. Then I found one marked Confidential, Walker Project. I clicked it. Richard Sloan had written it himself. The message read: "The son is cooperative. The father is the obstacle. Continue feeding the son partial information until acquisition is complete." Daniel lowered his head. They played me. I kept reading. The next email was worse. "If Walker refuses to sell, increase pressure through regulatory inspections. Delay permits. Restrict fuel deliveries. Force operational losses." I stopped scrolling. They weren't planning to negotiate. They were planning to suffocate us. Daniel clenched his fists. They were going to destroy the Marina. Until you had no choice. I nodded. "And that's exactly why your mother created the preservation agreement." Then I opened the financial projections. Rows of numbers filled the screen. Construction costs. Projected sales. Luxury apartment pricing. Estimated profits. $386 million. Daniel whistled quietly. They never wanted a marina. They wanted the shoreline. Exactly. Then I noticed one final spreadsheet. Its title made my blood run cold. Acquisition sequence. Harbor Point Marina was listed first. The seafood warehouse second. The shipyard third. But there was a fourth property. The Chesapeake Maritime Heritage Foundation. I frowned. That didn't make sense. The foundation wasn't selling anything. Then I remembered Sarah's agreement. If Apex forced an illegal transfer, the marina would become foundation property. I searched the emails again. Eventually, I found exactly what I feared. Richard already knew. Not the entire agreement, but enough to understand that Harbor Point could end up with the foundation. His solution was simple: buy the foundation too. I stared at the screen. He wasn't planning one acquisition. He was planning an entire monopoly over the waterfront. Daniel looked at me. So, even if Mom's agreement works, he still gets the marina. I slowly smiled. No. Because Richard overlooked one very important detail. Daniel frowned. What detail? I closed the laptop. The foundation doesn't own itself. It has a board. And tomorrow morning, I'm meeting every single member. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was about to make the first move. The Chesapeake Maritime Heritage Foundation occupied a weathered brick building overlooking the bay. It wasn't impressive. There were no marble floors. No expensive artwork. No glass towers. Just history. Old ship models. Hand-drawn nautical charts. Photographs of generations who had made their living from these waters. Sarah loved this place. She used to bring schoolchildren here every summer. She believed people protected what they understood. When I walked into the conference room, all 7 board members were already seated. Rachel Brooks, Eleanor Pierce, Captain Harold Bennett, and 4 others Sarah had trusted for years. Harold stood first. "It's good to see you again, Thomas. I wish it were under better circumstances." I placed the flash drive on the table. "So do I." For nearly an hour, I explained everything. The meetings. The fake consulting payments. The threats. The demolition plans. The emails. Nobody interrupted. When I finished, the room fell silent. Finally, Harold leaned forward. "Thomas, Sarah expected something like this." He opened a leather folder. Inside was another document I had never seen. It was signed by Sarah, dated 14 years earlier. Harold slid it across the table. "Read the last paragraph." I did. My eyes widened. "If any organization, company, or individual attempts to obtain Harbor Point Marina through fraud, coercion, or intentional deception, the Foundation shall immediately notify the Office of the State Attorney General, and release all supporting evidence to the public." I looked up. Sarah hadn't only protected the Marina. She had protected the truth. Rachel smiled for the first time all week. "We've been waiting years, hoping we'd never have to use that clause." Eleanor closed her notebook. "Now we have something even better." She tapped the flash drive. "Evidence." At that exact moment, someone knocked on the conference room door. A receptionist stepped inside. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a gentleman insisting on seeing the board. His name is Richard Sloane." Nobody said a word. Harold looked at me. I nodded. "Let him in." Seconds later, Richard Sloane walked confidently into the room. Tailored navy suit. Perfect smile. Expensive a watch. He looked exactly like a man who expected to win. His smile faded the instant he saw me. "Mr. Walker, I didn't realize you'd be here." "No, I imagine you didn't." Richard recovered quickly. He placed a polished leather portfolio on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, Apex Coastal Developments would like to discuss an exciting partnership with the Foundation." Harold didn't even open the portfolio. Instead, he slid Richard's own email across the table. The one labeled, "Confidential, Walker Project." Richard's expression changed. For the first time, the confident businessman disappeared. In his place stood a man who realized his secret had just become public. The room remained silent. Richard Sloane looked from one face to another. For the first time, he realized he wasn't leading the meeting anymore. He cleared his throat. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Eleanor slid another document across the table. "No, there hasn't." Richard looked down. It was a copy of the financial projections from the flash drive. The same document estimating hundreds of millions in profit. Beside it, Rachel placed copies of the emails. Then Harold placed Richard's handwritten business card on top. "If your father refuses to cooperate, we'll make sure he has no choice." Richard's confidence disappeared. "I can explain." "So can we." Harold reached for the conference phone. The Office of the State Attorney General has already received digital copies of every document. The County Planning Commission has them as well. And several local newspapers. Richard stared in disbelief. You already sent them? Rachel nodded. About 20 minutes ago. For several seconds, Richard didn't move. Then he quietly closed his portfolio. Without another word, he stood, turned, and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he stopped. He looked directly at me. You've made a very expensive mistake. I smiled. No, you did. The door closed behind him. That was the last time I ever saw Richard Sloane. Over the following months, everything unraveled. State investigators opened an inquiry into Apex coastal developments. Several executives resigned. Multiple county officials faced corruption investigations. The waterfront acquisition project collapsed before a single building was constructed. Harbor Point Marina never changed hands. Instead, the foundation officially recognized it as a protected maritime landmark. No developer could ever erase its history again. As for Daniel, our relationship didn't heal overnight. Trust doesn't return simply because someone says they're sorry. It returns, one honest day at a time. He spent the next year rebuilding what he'd nearly lost. Not just the marina, our family. He met personally with every slip owner, every fisherman, every mechanic, every employee. He admitted his mistakes. He never blamed anyone else. One evening, nearly a year later, we sat together on the end of Dock C. The sun was setting over the bay. The water looked exactly the way it had the day Sarah and I first dreamed of building Harbor Point. Daniel broke the silence. Dad, I finally understand why Mom loved this place. I looked across the marina. Children were laughing on the docks. An old couple was preparing their sailboat for the weekend. Pete was finishing repairs on a charter boat. It wasn't perfect. It never had been. But it was alive. I smiled. Your mother never believed we owned this marina. Daniel looked at me. What do you mean? I remembered something Sarah had whispered to me years ago. We're only taking care of it until it's someone else's turn. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel nodded. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it's never my mistake again. As the last light disappeared beyond the water, I realized something. Richard Sloane had tried to buy a shoreline. But Sarah had understood the truth years before any of us. A marina isn't measured by the value of its land. It's measured by the lives anchored there. And as long as Harbor Point remained a place where families gathered, friends returned, and memories were made, my wife's dream would never disappear. It would simply welcome the next tide.